I've been trying to run Flight Simulator 2024 on my Xbox Series X over my 70 megabit per second internet connection, and I've been running into all kinds of graphics related problems with the simulation. So this video basically is about the problems that I've had and the changes that can be made to some of the settings within Flight Sim 2024 to hopefully improve the situation a bit. If we look at the ground detail where there's supposed to be buildings underneath the aircraft, we can basically see that it just isn't drawing them at all. There's no detail down there. It all just looks a bit like a nuclear wasteland, really. So it just can't cope with the detail of built up areas. Everything just looks a bit squashed and just really poor. You can ignore the pilot's head sticking out the top of the aircraft. I don't think that's a problem with the internet connection or the graphics. That's just a general bug in the software, which I think has actually subsequently been fixed, because that problem at least hasn't recurred in more recent times. This is over Southampton Port in the UK, so there should be ships docked at the side of the quay, but again there's very little detail going on down there. And lots of sort of imperfections in the graphics as it's flashing, as it's just trying to build stuff but can't. So this is now coming in low over the quayside. Again, we've got all the problems with trying to draw the ground graphics. It's trying to fill in the detail as we go, but of course it's failing. So the whole combination of my Xbox, my internet connection, really can't cope with the kind of detail that Flight Sim 2024 is trying to draw within the images. So this has gone into drone mode now, so that we can just do like a bit of a low swoop over some of the details on the quayside, and the cars are just not defined at all. Similarly with the buildings in the background. There are, however, a couple of settings that we can make change on the within the program itself to actually start improving matters. They do, however, come with a downside, which is you do lose a lot of the detail that you get on the ground, but it's a case of compromises, really, what you're prepared to do. The two settings changes that we can actually make are a setting called photogrammetry, which is a case of you can turn that on or off, and the other one is the rolling cache limit that the program reserves on your hard drive for storing data. I'll explain later how to actually make those changes, but first of all I thought I would show you what differences they do make. So, back flying over towards Southampton Port again. This time I've made a settings change. I've left the photogrammetry setting turned on, but I have increased the rolling cache limit from 16 gigabytes, which seemed to be its default setting, up to 128 gigabytes. And that has made a difference. At least it has for the general flying around bit. The ground detail you can see now is more detailed and more stable. It's still not perfect because you can see by that bridge on the left it looks solid when of course it isn't. But other than that, it does look a lot better than it did before. So making that one setting change has certainly improved the situation. Again, you can see the sort of, it's tried to draw the bridge over the river, but not totally successfully. So the lower you go, the worse the graphics performance becomes. So back into drone mode now, so we can go much closer to the ground, and as we can see, again the detail on the cars is very poor. So once you get really low down, it hasn't made a significant difference to the quality of the drawing of the buildings. Similarly, you can see on the ships in the harbour, they are very poorly drawn. They may look okay from the sky, but they don't work once you get up close, so there'd be no point getting out of your aeroplane and taking a walk around and hoping to see an extremely detailed environment around you. Again, I think improvements, but not enough. Some of the ships drawn in the harbour are actually pretty good. They're very detailed. But most of the big ships, well, all of the big ships are very poorly detailed. And the all of the everything around on the quayside is really bad. I mean, that's meant to be a multi-story car park. So that's the first setting I tried changing to see if it would make much of a difference, and from the air it has made a difference, but it's still, yeah, it's still really poor if you try and get low to the ground. Here's another example now of a different flight, just coming up over the coast of Ireland. At just over 5,000 feet. See how it looks. The settings now, the photogrammetry is still turned on, so it should have maximum amount of detail. The rolling cache limit I've increased to 256 gigabytes from the previous 128 to see if that would make a further difference. Certainly at the moment it looks okay, but once we get over the built-up area and we start to again take a look at the ground, we can actually see that once again it's really struggling to draw the ground detail. The buildings down below all appear to be incomplete. Again, it just doesn't look like a proper city. It looks like the buildings are semi-derelict. So changing the rolling cache on its own is not enough to get a really good graphics, even flying at about 5,000 feet. So looking down on the ground now, we can see it's the same as it was at the Southampton port, the level of detail we're getting. And I also discovered, I think, that changing or increasing the rolling cache to 256 gigabytes from 128 actually makes no difference. So I don't think it's necessary to even try and increase it that high. 128 is probably as high as you want to go, because that does it is reserving that space on your Xbox hard drive, so you effectively lose that space for use by other games. So, and as the hard drive itself is only 1 TB, you're actually using up a big chunk of your available space by doing this. The airport buildings here appear to be good quality, nice and sharp, but everything else in the background is again very poorly drawn. So what difference does having the photogrammetry setting turned on make? Well, this is a screenshot taken from above central London looking down on Tower Bridge with photogrammetry turned on, and at first glance it does look pretty good, but if we take a closer look, and you can see that particularly if we zoom in, that the detail on a lot of the buildings is just not very good. It kind of looks okay at first glance, but and obviously the lower you get to the ground, the closer you get to the ground, the worse the detail actually becomes. So looking at this zoom shot, we can see that the buildings suffer from the same problems that they did in the previous buildings that we saw in Southampton Port and over in Ireland. They're just indistinctly drawn. Then the closer we would go to the ground, just the worse the detail would get. So it doesn't really work unless you're flying at altitude. But even then, as we saw on the previous ones over Ireland, the ground just doesn't look right from the air. So let's turn photogrammetry off and see what we get. So this is how it looks with photogrammetry turned off. As we can see, everything in the picture is now nice and sharp, but the price we pay for that is we've lost the detail. The buildings now have all been replaced by generic structures, I suppose, rather than the actual buildings. So it's lost a bit of the look, or a lot of the look, that you would in reality get if you were looking at that scene over London. So the layout of things is pretty much correct. It's just the detail and the way the individual structures look that are no longer correct when you turn photogrammetry off. A lot of the, as we'll see shortly, a lot of the iconic buildings in London are drawn correctly. Things like, well, Tower Bridge is drawn correctly. It looks as it should look, and other things as well. The Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, Tower of London, those kind of things, they all look as they should. But all the other generic buildings in London are just replaced by structures. So in actual fact, what it does is it makes Flight Sim 2024 look a lot like Flight Sim 2020 used to look. Back into drone mode now, so that we can take a closer look at the ground. So this is obviously with photogrammetry turned off, but it still looks pretty good, I think. Tower Bridge looks nicely drawn, nicely detailed. And we have the Tower of London. Again, it's properly drawn. It looks fine. I don't think I'd want to be going into walk around mode and trying to explore the streets of London in this mode, because I think it wouldn't look very brilliant at all, really, because all the buildings would just be these generic buildings rather than looking like they actually should look. And that would be the advantage of the photogrammetry mode, if we could turn that on and get an acceptable level of graphics, but unfortunately that's not the case. But as we travel a bit up the Thames towards the Houses of Parliament, yeah, it looks fine. It particularly would look fine if you were flying over it. Again, some of the ground detail, these boats and stuff, the attempt at these boats, that doesn't work at all, but that used to be the case in Flight Sim 2020. But these bridges are nicely drawn. The London Eye. Again, that's got detail. Looks good. Coming up on the Houses of Parliament, or the Palace of Westminster to give it its posh title. Big Ben. So, back up in the airplane. This is with photogrammetry turned off, so this is the kind of view we're getting now over London in this mode. Bearing in mind that I've been attempting to run this on my Xbox within the restrictions of my 70 megabit per second internet connection. There's nothing I can do about my internet connection. I can't actually substantially increase that because of the infrastructure that exists in the area that I live. So I'm stuck with that and I just have to work with it. So the mode that I think I shall personally run Flight Sim 2024 in moving forwards is with the photogrammetry turned off. And I'll just have to live with the fact that the ground detail is not as detailed as it should be, and I'll leave the rolling cache as being 128 gigabytes. I think that allows it to temporarily store enough data on the hard drive to make the difference about whether it's going to run smoothly or not. But as we can see from these graphics from the air, it's now, the ground all looks, nice and sharp. Everything looks good. It just doesn't look like the nuclear wasteland that it looked like when I was first of all trying to fly around city landscapes. So to some extent that's worked, even though I know that these buildings are not all as they should be, but at least the iconic buildings, you can pick them out and you can certainly tell where they are, and you get a general gist of how the location actually looks in reality. So graphically, I think it's a case of if you don't take advantage of the photogrammetry option within Flight Sim 2024, are the graphics actually any better than the graphics in Flight Sim 2020 used to be? Well, I think the answer to that is yes, I think they are. I think it is just that little bit better, not just the external views that you're getting, but also I think the internal views on the aeroplanes as well. I think in 2024 it just looks a little bit sharper, a little bit clearer. I noticed that when I tried Flight Sim 2020 back to back with this 24 version, moving from the same type of aeroplane one to the other, and I could notice a difference, that the interior of the aeroplane did look just that little bit better in the 24 version than the 2020 version, although having said that, it's not a huge difference. In terms of trying to work out what it is that makes the difference in terms of whether you could run with photogrammetry turned on or off. I'm assuming it just has to come down to internet connection. My 70 megabit per second is simply not enough to be able to run this game properly. If I wanted to take full advantage of all the brilliant things that Flight Sim 2024 can offer, then I would have to get a much faster internet connection installed to be able to take advantage of all of the ground detail that you can get. And as I mentioned earlier, that's not an option for me because the infrastructure here just doesn't support that. So even if I wanted to spend the money, I couldn't. But as just a pure flight sim, if you don't want to go right down onto the ground, then I think Flight Sim 2024 does have a great deal to offer. I think graphically it can work fine, as we can see in these pictures. And I think obviously 2024 doesn't just offer the improved graphics over 2020. It has lots of different modes. It has the world photography mode, which I must confess I haven't really explored that yet. I've been spending all my time trying to make the damn thing work properly. But I have been messing around in career mode, and I found that to be quite entertaining. So that certainly adds another dimension to the whole flight sim experience, and I do find that quite enjoyable. So obviously those things were not available in Flight Simulator 2020, so you do get the advantages of having those. Although Flight Sim 2024 is still pretty buggy in reality, but hopefully over time the developers will be working out those particular problems. So knowing what I now know, would I still buy Flight Sim 2024? Well, I suppose the answer to that is it really depends. I subscribe to the Microsoft Game Pass, so I get a whole bunch of games all included in my monthly subscription, which is £15 a month, and that includes Flight Sim 2024, so I haven't had to pay any extra to actually get the use of this. And also under the Game Pass subscription, I also have access to Flight Sim 2020, and that's how I started. And I must confess, I did actually buy the Xbox so that I could get access to the Microsoft Flight Simulator. At that time it was 2020, so I was really looking forward to 2024. So from my point of view, there's no downside to running 2024. But I think if I didn't have Game Pass and I just wanted to buy a copy of Flight Simulator, would I spend the money on 2024 or would I spend the money on 2020? I think I would still spend the money on 2024 because I think it can be made to work acceptably well with a bit of perseverance. And it does offer certain advantages over 2020. So if I didn't already have access to 2020, then yeah, I would choose 2024 over it, even with all its problems. However, if I didn't have Game Pass and I'd already paid for a copy of Flight Sim 2020, would I bother spending another somewhere between £70 and £200 depending on version? Would I spend that extra money to get Flight Simulator 2024? And I think the answer to that is probably no, not as it currently stands. I would give it some time to get all of its bugs ironed out, and hopefully, who knows, maybe the developers will develop it so that the graphics all work perfectly well on a moderate internet connection, and you don't need some super fast internet connection to make it all work properly. And I'm sure the bugs that currently exist within 2024 will get ironed out in due course. I mean, what kind of internet connection you're going to need for to get access to all of the great features that Flight Sim 2024 has. I honestly have no idea what you would need. All I know is it needs to be considerably greater than the 70 megabit per second that I have. I'm assuming it's probably got to be something over at least 200 megabits per second, which means you're going to need a full fiber access, full fiber broadband access, and I don't know what percentage of people actually have access to that, so I don't know how big a mistake that might have been for Microsoft or Asobo in terms of not making it work properly with a moderate level of access, because obviously it's trying to pull data down from the cloud all the time, which for the level of detail that it's capable of, that just doesn't work without a super fast broadband connection. So all in all, I don't regret, well, I haven't bought it because it's included in my Game Pass subscription, but if I had bought it, I don't think I would regret having paid the money for it, because I think it can be made to work as a pure flight sim pretty well. And I do like the career mode in it, so all in all I think it does work pretty well. I just wish I had access to all its features, and who knows, maybe in due course I'll be able to get them. So I'll finish up by showing how to make the changes to the turning the photogrammetry on and off, and how to increase the rolling cache limit in the settings within Microsoft Flight Simulator. A word of warning on the cache limit though. As I said, it seems to default to 16 gigabytes, and really I think that needs to be increased quite a lot to be able to get the thing to run smoothly on my internet connection anyway, but to give it access to more disk space so that it can download more data. But the amount of cache that you allocate it on your hard drive does tie up that amount of space on your hard drive, so it makes it not available to other games. And another word of warning is that when you increase it within the flight sim settings, you can't then decide to decrease it. It won't let you decrease it, it will only ever let you increase it. Probably because it's already used it to download a whole bunch of extra data for you. So the only way you could reduce it if you wanted to in the future, so you set it to say, like I did, 256 gigabytes, and you decide, well actually that's just too much and it doesn't actually make that much difference. The only way you could reduce it would be to literally uninstall the game and then reinstall it, and then it would go back, I believe, to the standard 16 gigabytes, and then you could then start increasing it from there. So uninstalling it and reinstalling it is not a huge problem, because it still saves all of your user data when you uninstall it. So for example, if you'd made progress in career mode and you uninstalled the game, you wouldn't lose the stage that you're at in career mode, because when you reinstall the game you'd find all of those things come back with it, because it obviously remembers all your user data and just uninstalls everything else. So, but anyway, here's how to make the changes to the settings. First of all, make sure you've got general ticked, then select online from the left hand box. You then want to check the photogrammetry switch, and you can either just turn it on or turn it off. I've got it off. And then you want to scroll down to the rolling cache limit. I've got it set at 256 gigabytes, but as I mentioned, I would only change that to 128 gigabytes because I found the extra didn't make any significant difference. Then when that is all done, you just click on Save and Back, and then very final thing, I would close the program down, reboot your Xbox, then start Flight Sim up again and see if it's made a difference.